I was recently watching a short where Alex O'Connor was debating Ben Shapiro, and it's actually of a much larger segment where they were discussing the needfulness of religion, whether it, it's kind of good, bad, necessary, etc. But this short actually used one of the concepts I brought to you previously, which is the appeal to presentation. So Alex is really caught up in this philosophical rant, and he is powering off all kind of thoughts and actually fast forward his words, and in the middle, in the cuts, you got Ben Shapiro going. And they're trying to make Ben Shapiro look ridiculous by appeal to presentation, which is something that I have, again, covered in another video. Actually, if you go watch the video, you see very well that Ben Shapiro more than holds his own. But I want to actually address Alex talking about free will and it not being legitimate. He's like, I don't think that free will exists. And he says, because of basically the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction. And then he jumps into every mental thought is either determined or it is random. So basically, if our thoughts are random, then we're not in control of them. Or if it is determined, and he goes on this a pretty interesting rant, but he just goes and he just never really puts a full handle on this because we can't. But he goes all the way back and it's like, eventually something else determines, not us, we're just kind of along for the ride. And if something else is making this decision, then we are not making this decision. So actually, in all of this, Alex is arguing from what I would call absurdity. And why would I say that? Why would I say that Alex is actually arguing from absurdity? Because in his mind, in materialism, there is no difference between random and determined. They're actually, at the end of the day, both the exact same thing. And so why then would you engage in an argument to try to prove someone else wrong about not having a free will if you didn't really think there was a distinction between the two, and then you were trying to prove the other person wrong and you don't even believe in right and wrong with all of these concepts that you think are the same thing, which doesn't make any sense. Why are you arguing in the first place? Alex does this neat little trick to build his foundation for his thought that I don't know if he's aware of, but maybe he does. But he tries to create a duality out of one leg of a free will. He jumps quickly from the law of identity to the law of non-contradiction to determined and undetermined, and he makes it like there's only true and false. There's just two sides to one decision. Well, free will at minimum has two decisions involved in it. And so if you think about this with me, you have option A and you have option B. Now, I understand what Alex is trying to state. What he is going to attempt to state here is that if you take option A and go to America, or you take option B and go to Russia, if you are in America, it is true that you are not in Russia. And if you are in Russia, it is true that you are not in America. A and B both can't be true at the same time. But we're talking about potential and the decision making, and that is not a true-false scenario. It is a true scenario, to actual real potential outcomes. You see, we don't believe that everything in life that we don't decide to do is not real. I think of mixing like bleach with water or mixing bleach with ammonia. I don't think that one of these concepts is real and the other one is not real. I actually believe that both will have their own distinct chemical reactions, and I would hold fast to that, objective reality. So with this, he goes on with the law of, let me say this, the law of non-contradiction points out very clearly something like morality. You can actually dig all the way down discussing right and wrong. I've done that in other videos. but you will actually get to a baseline of believing that you're right and somebody else believing somebody else is wrong. And that is a repeating, never-ending cycle. On top of that, the law of non-contradiction and the law of identity really helps us to nail down that reality is actually very logical. But it fails, the law of non-contradiction fails to say anything about the future, at least in this segue. Because the law of non-contradiction can tell us what is true currently and presently, but it doesn't really make a forward statement about potential realities. So in all of this, I even wonder why Alex would enter into the conversation about there being a difference between determined and random, except for the fact that he is very familiar with cause and effect, as we all are. And so we chase down effects to their causes. So if a tree falls over, why did the tree fall over? Well, there was a lot of wind. Where did the wind come from? It came from a hot front touching a cold front, which created a massive twister that tore the tree down. So we love to chase down cause and effects. And when it comes to the effects that people are causing, we trace that to the source, and then we look around the source. You can walk behind a person, you can walk in front, above a person, you can walk underneath a person, and it sure doesn't seem to be that this causality is coming from any other location but a human being. In fact, it seems to be originating inside the human being. And so we then begin to look internally. Now, we can only do this with ourselves and then ask other people, and try to get some feedback from them. But just thinking about this, it sure appears like I am making my own decisions. That appears to be the case. So there's that first, but that doesn't, necessarily make it right. But I can also test this determinism in me, by making choices, but I could also surrender that to another person. I could say, okay, I'm going to let them make choices and decisions, and then I'm going to obey them. And so they can say, hey, stand up. So I stand up. They say, sit down. I say, sit down. They say, get on the floor. I get on the floor. And I can just be determined by someone else, or I could determine this myself, and then I can turn that on and off. Which makes a lot of sense. And I can even sequence it. I can say, I'm going to do it every other time. I'm going to do it in the Fibonacci sequence. I am going to do this once every 15 times. And that begins to kind of confirm for me that I am making my own decisions. Further, there is this precise follow-through when I make decisions that they happen. I decide, and then I act, and those decisions come out. So I sure seem to be the cause of my own decision making. Well, further, we're also familiar with making decisions where nothing happens. Like there are some people that want to stand up and walk, and they tell their body to stand up and walk, and they try to make the decision, and nothing happens from that. And so they know they are making a decision, but there is no cause coming out of it. There's also times that we try to tell our brain, we're like, hey, brain, I want you to think up person's name. And the thought does not come. And the longer it sits there, we're like, well, I'm making the decision to do this, but I'm not really fully in control of the effect here. We can also do something that's kind of strange, but we can actually decide against ourselves and our own impulses. We know this by something called self-control. But as far as the complete provability of if, we have free will or not, it's funny that we would assume the materialism of the universe, and we would be completely fine with that, with less testing than we've actually done with our own free will. You see, our free will is with us from beginning of consciousness to the end of consciousness every single day. We have again and again and again used our free will in such a fashion that we do believe that we control our free will. In fact, we believe it so deeply, we believe that other people control their free will. That's why we ask them, don't do anything wrong to me. Stop doing what you're doing. I know you're choosing to do it. So materialism, if we call it really what it is a mental attempt to get out from under personal responsibility, but yet we operate in ways that acknowledge that we believe in personal responsibility. That is our default way of acting as human beings. On top of this, we are very intentional about certain things, which points to the fact, again, that surely I am making these decisions. And then, like I've already said, we do this constant testing. It's like the largest ongoing scientific experiment in history of a person, of whether they are making their own decisions or not. So I think all of these things at least make a very strong case that we are determining our actions and even our thoughts.